The protagonist had devoted his entire life to serving the Empire, dreaming only of one day returning to his homeland. Yet in the end, he was betrayed and cast aside. Through a mysterious artifact, however, he was granted a second chance, reborn as an infant into a noble family. Determined to take revenge, he vowed to use his former knowledge and newfound powers as a necromancer to rise again. Quickly recognized as a prodigy, he began his new journey to reclaim everything he had lost. The story then shifts to Earth in the year 2025. Amid a devastating war between humanity and monstrous creatures, a soldier lies mortally wounded on the battlefield. As a towering beast closes in for the kill, Commander Han Seong, the supreme leader of Earth's final defense force, intervenes, saving the man at the last moment. Han Seong engages the monster in a fierce battle, dodging its relentless strikes and countering with precise attacks that slice through its tentacles. He orders the wounded soldier to get back up and fight, and the man obeys, rejoining the struggle amid waves of monstrous enemies that have plagued humanity for decades. Believing victory is near, Han Seong charges toward the last remaining monster, but just as he prepares to strike, a brilliant golden magic circle materializes in front of him. Before he can react, chains of light wrap around his body, pulling him away from the battlefield. Disoriented, Han Seong finds himself in an unfamiliar chamber, facing an elderly magician who marvels at the success of his summoning ritual. The sorcerer hails him as a hero from another world and implores him to defeat the Demon King to save their empire. Han Seong reacts with anger and disbelief, demanding to know where he is, and insisting he has no time for such delusions. He is a soldier from Korea, not some fantasy hero. The magician silences him abruptly, activating a magical covenant known as Ga. Agonizing pain shoots through Han Seong's body, forcing him to scream in torment. The magician coldly remarks that if the hero had obeyed when asked kindly, the spell would not have caused him pain. As the suffering subsides, Han Seong glares in fury, thinking bitterly that he had never been asked kindly at all. The old mage repeats his command, to slay the Demon King and save the Empire, as a gleaming sword materializes at Han Seong's feet, marking the beginning of his unwanted destiny. The magician promised Han Seong that if he fulfilled their request and defeated the Demon King, they might return him to his world. Left with no real choice, Han Seong reluctantly agreed. Thus began his new life in a foreign empire, where he was forced to fight as their summoned hero. He waged countless battles, leading endless suppression campaigns, cutting down enemies day after day to serve the Empire's will. Years passed, 3, then 5, then 10. As Han Seong continued his bloody crusade against the Demon King's army, he sacrificed his youth and humanity to fulfill his mission, dreaming each night of the day he would finally go home. At last, he slew the Demon King, Baylor, believing his long nightmare was over. Yet his victory brought no freedom. The same old magician appeared once again, handing him a new mission. Furious, Han Seong protested, declaring that their deal had been fulfilled. But the magician coldly replied that saving the Empire did not end with killing the Demon King. He claimed that rebels opposing the Empire's unification must also be purged, and that there was one last threat left for Han Seong to eliminate, a warrior named Battle, from the Teutonia Night Nation. The magician spoke with deceitful kindness, asking Han Seong to help them just a little longer. Realizing he was nothing but a chained dog, Han Seong accepted with bitter resignation. The scene shifted to the burning nation of Teutonia, where Han Seong fought once more, wondering when his servitude would finally end. In a fierce duel against Battle, he managed to stab his opponent through the chest. Battle called him naive, and Han Seong, his heart heavy, admitted he had no other choice. Apologizing to his foe, he listened as Battle, recognizing him as the hero from another world, told him not to feel remorse, because he too would soon be discarded. With those final words, Battle fell. Believing the ordeal was finally over, Han Seong prepared to return. But before he could take a step, Count Brandenburg appeared behind him, congratulating him on his success. Without warning, the Count thrust his sword through Han Seong's back. Shocked and bleeding, Han Seong turned to face his betrayer, recognizing him instantly. Brandenburg, with a mocking smile, praised Han Seong for his service as the Empire's loyal commander, remarking that it was rare to find a hunting dog so obedient. Han Seong, racked with pain, cursed him and realized the promise of returning home had been a lie all along. Brandenburg declared that there was no point in keeping a dog that might one day bite its master and bid Han Seong farewell. As the hero collapsed, he thought bitterly that he had always known they would never release him. In his final moments, he cursed the Empire and swore that one day it would pay for its betrayal. As his life faded, the gem of resurrection embedded in his chest began to glow. Han Seong vowed never to forget the humiliation he suffered, and that the Empire would one day fall by his hand. That same night, while his body perished, a new life began elsewhere, inside a noble household where a duchess rejoiced at the birth of her son Dale. The duchess gazed lovingly at the newborn in her arms and softly told him that she was his mother. The infant Han Seong, reborn, looked up at her and then at the man standing beside her, sensing an uncanny familiarity. In the next moment, recognition struck. The man was none other than Duke Jackson, the Empire's most powerful necromancer and master of dark magic. With that realization, Han Seong understood where he was. Necropolis, the Empire's capital of black magic, specifically within the tower that governed it. The resurrection stone he had hidden long ago had worked. That single-use artifact, concealed during his tie as the Empire's chained hunting dog, had granted him a new life. Fate had chosen to make him the eldest son of one of the Empire's highest-ranking noble families. The infant smirked inwardly, realizing he had been born into privilege. Secretly, he vowed that once he mastered necromancy, he would destroy the corrupt empire that betrayed him. Duke Jackson soon noticed something unusual. Baby was not crying. Concerned, the Duchess asked the nurse to examine him. The nurse remarked that it was strange indeed, for the child's breathing was clear and strong. Inside, the infant Dale, Han Seong's new identity, scoffed silently, thinking that of course he would not cry, and wondering if they had any idea how old his mind truly was. The nurse reassured the Duchess that the baby was healthy, but added that if they were really worried, a quick slap would make him cry. Before Dale could protest, the nurse struck him gently across the cheek, leaving him furious and letting out muffled, indignant sounds. Duke Jackson chuckled that his son was stubborn, and the Duchess agreed, smiling that he must have inherited that trait. She then requested to hold the baby herself. Inwardly fuming, Dale thought they were all fools, and mentally shouted that their son was perfectly fine. Yet when his mother took him into her arms and brushed his cheek softly, he froze. The warmth of her touch stirred something long buried within him. He suddenly remembered the emptiness of his past life. Years of cold solitude, loyalty repaid with betrayal, and the complete absence of tenderness. That gentle caress shattered his composure. For the first time in his two lives, Han Seong, now Dale cried, tears flowing freely as his heart remembered what warmth felt like. 8 years passed. The Duke and Duchess conversed in their chamber, remarking on how quickly time had flown. The Duchess asked if Dale was still in the study, observing that he had been absorbed in books since the age of 4. The Duke laughed, saying their son must take after her. Then, in a more serious tone, he mentioned that Dale showed a deep interest in magic. The Duchess reminded him of his promise not to teach the boy necromancy, and the Duke nodded, assuring her that he remembered. As they spoke, Dale was shown reading alone in the vast library, his eyes sharp and intent, already far more aware of his destiny than anyone around him could imagine. The Duke reassured his wife not to worry, and changed the subject to discuss a birthday present for Dale, whose 8th birthday was the following day. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. A maid rushed in, panicked, shouting that something strange was happening to the young master in the study. Alarmed, the Duke and Duchess ran to the library, calling out for Dale. When they arrived, they found their son kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a swirling aura of brilliant blue mana. Shocked, they called his name. The Duchess rushed forward, embracing him in fear and asking if he was hurt, but Dale quickly reassured her that he was fine. The Duke, standing silently for a moment, could feel the immense power in the air and marveled at what he was witnessing. For a child who had just turned 8, to generate this level of mana was extraordinary. He called to his son and asked seriously whether he had released the mana himself. Inside, Dale froze, realizing he had made a mistake. He hadn't meant to release his mana, and if he said the wrong thing, they might grow suspicious of who he truly was. Before he could think of an excuse, the Duke smiled and patted his head proudly, saying, "This is my boy." Then, with a note of regret, he added that it was a shame he could not teach Dale necromancy. Dale's expression darkened. The realization that his father would never pass down the art of necromancy struck him hard. He began to worry about how he would fulfill his vow of revenge without that knowledge. The Duchess gently told Dale to return to his room, promising that the servants would clean the library. As he left, the Duke turned to his wife Elena and smiled, saying that he had just thought of the perfect gift for their son. The next evening, a lavish birthday banquet filled the ducal mansion. Nobles from every corner of the Black Duke's territory attended, their voices echoing through the grand hall. Many whispered in admiration about the scale of the celebration and wondered when the young heir would make his appearance. On the second floor, Dale sat apart from the crowd, gazing down at the bustling ballroom with boredom. The endless noise and chatter exhausted him. Having lived a previous life as a weapon of war, he still found it strange to be treated as a noble child. His thoughts wandered to the incident in the study a few days earlier, and the desk he had destroyed when his mana had gone out of control. It had happened simply because he was thinking about his past life as the Empire's hero. He also remembered the mysterious biography of the hero he had found, and wondered who had left it there. Despite his father's prohibition, he could not abandon the idea of learning necromancy. His talent and lineage were too exceptional to ignore. He briefly considered asking to study necromancy as his birthday gift, but quickly dismissed the idea. With his parents watching him so closely, it would be impossible. As he sat lost in thought, his mother, Duchess Elena, appeared beside him, her gentle voice breaking through his gloom. She smiled and told him that he had waited long enough and that it was time for him to join his guests below. Dale greeted his mother politely, and she smiled warmly, wishing him a happy 8th birthday. As he thanked her, he noticed a graceful figure standing behind him and curiously asked who the guest was. His mother encouraged him to go and greet the visitor, then introduced her formally. The guest was Ms. Sebia, an elf and one of the elders of the Blue Magic Tower, renowned across the Empire as the Wise Spirit. and a master of water elemental magic. The Duchess proudly announced that Ms. Sebia would be Dale's new instructor. Dale was momentarily stunned as the elf stepped forward with a gentle smile, saying she looked forward to working with him. His mother repeated her birthday wishes, clearly delighted. Inside, Dale quickly analyzed the situation. A teacher from the Blue Magic Tower meant only one thing. His parents had no intention of allowing him to study dark magic. Water elemental magic emphasized protection and suppression, exactly the opposite of necromancy. It was now certain that his mother was determined to keep him far from the dark arts. Later that evening, Miss Sebia asked to speak with Dale privately, and he agreed. Once alone, she told him frankly that her role was to teach him only water magic. Her perceptive gaze caught him off guard as she asked whether he was disappointed, guessing that he desired to learn something else. Dale was surprised by her insight. Miss Sebia smiled faintly and explained that it was perfectly natural for the son of the Black Duke to be curious about necromancy. She continued, saying that the Duke's marriage to Lady Elelena was sealed by a solemn vow. Duke had promised never to pass down his dark craft to their children. Sebia spoke of that day long ago when the black magicians of the Empire attended the wedding dressed entirely in white instead of their traditional black robes, a symbolic gesture to honor the Duchess's wish. This union had been founded on that promise, and thus for now, learning necromancy was impossible. Still, she assured him that in Nye she would try to persuade Lady Elelena to reconsider. Until then, she urged Dale to follow her teachings and master the water element. Intrigued, Dale asked her a question in return. As an elf devoted to the natural order, didn't she consider black magic and necromancy, raising the dead, to be vile acts against nature? Sebia smiled thoughtfully and countered with a question of her own. Then what of the holy priests, she asked, who also bring back the dead with their divine power? Is that not equally against the will of nature? Her response left Dale speechless. She concluded calmly that in her eyes necromancy and resurrection were two sides of the same act. Dale realized she was unlike any elf he had heard of, open-minded, insightful, and unafraid to question dogma. For the first time, he thought she might actually become a worthy mentor. Sebia then suggested they begin their first lesson. She mentioned that she had heard he had already formed fragments of a mana circle, and explained that their first objective would be to expand those fragments into a complete mana circle. Dale eagerly agreed, recognizing this as the foundation required in every magical text he had studied. Sebia instructed him to place his hand over his heart and focus. As Dale began to concentrate, she spoke softly, explaining that unlike Earth, this world was saturated with mana, an invisible force flowing through every living thing. Sebia explained that in this world, all ancient beings such as dragons were capable of manipulating raw, unfiltered mana. Ordinary humans lacked that natural affinity, which was why they required a mana circle, a formation located within the heart, to filter and refine raw energy into usable magical power. She concluded the first lesson by describing the process in detail. Dale needed to gather the scattered fragments of his mana circle around his heart, connect them into a complete ring, and then rotate it steadily to stabilize the flow. Dale listened attentively and quickly understood that the circle was essentially an engraving of a monoflow pathway, carved upon the heart. Sebia instructed him to begin slowly, practicing the gentle rotation of mana within himself. She reminded him that most students needed at least a month to succeed, and advised him not to rush. Before she could continue, Dale interrupted hesitantly, saying he thought he had already done it. Startled, Sebia stared at him in disbelief. It was unthinkable for a beginner, especially an 8-year-old, to complete a mana circle within minutes. Such a feat was possible only for those blessed with a heaven-sent talent. Regaining her composure, she asked him to release some of his magical energy through the newly formed circle. As she waited, she reflected that even gifted children usually struggle just to channel mana properly. Meanwhile, Dale, carrying the consciousness of Han Xiang, thought coldly that this level of power was nowhere near enough to challenge the Empire or surpass Duke Jackson. Memories of his past life as a battle-hardened hero resurfaced. Once wielded deadly combat magic through seals engraved on his body. Yet this life was different. His new vessel, the heir of the Black Magic Tower's master, seemed to absorb mana as naturally as breathing. A new idea began to take root in his mind. Perhaps he could master other types of magic beyond water. He focused his mana, guiding it from his heart through his arm to his fingertips, visualizing the ultimate weapon shard that would one day destroy the Empire. He shaped the energy into a solid form. To Sebia's astonishment, the mana condensed into a crystalline projectile, a nearly perfect ice bolt. She whispered to herself that this should have been impossible. Spells of that complexity usually collapsed under their own instability when condensed and released. Assuming it would lack destructive power, she watched as Dale aimed and cast the spell. The ice bolt struck a nearby tree, exploding with a deafening impact that reduced it to splinters. Sebia's eyes widened in disbelief. The ice was so dense and sharp it pierced the trunk cleanly before shattering it entirely. No ordinary child could have achieved such precision, let alone produced a spell of that magnitude. Dale turned toward her with a disarmingly innocent smile and asked softly if he had done something wrong. Sebia stood speechless, utterly shaken, realizing that the boy before her had not only circulated mana and released power, but had also instinctively fused it with elemental energy. Though it was a basic spell, he had executed it with flawless control, drawing on the natural cold in the air to amplify its strength. In that moment, Subia could only stare at him in awe, silently questioning who, or what, this extraordinary child truly was. Subia stood silently, still trying to process what she had just witnessed. The intricacy of the magic formula Dale had used was far beyond anything an innocent child could have produced by accident. Upon careful observation, she realized he had unconsciously applied 3 advanced formulas: rotation, acceleration, and compression, collectively known among battle mages as the golden ratio of military magic. The mere fact that he had executed such a refined and lethal spell instinctively was nothing short of astounding. When Dale called out to her, concerned by her silence, she quickly composed herself and replied that it was nothing. Yet deep down, she understood now why Duke Jackson, the infamous Black Archmage, carried such deep regret. His son's gift was extraordinary, but also terrifying. Later that evening, Subia met with the Duke to deliver her report. He listened intently, eyebrows raised when she began by saying she could not teach Dale. Surprised, he questioned her reasoning, arguing that if his son had achieved the formation of the first mana circle within minutes, that should be all the more reason to nurture his potential. Subia, however, shook her head gravely and explained that the moment Dale completed his first circle, he immediately cast a flawless combat spell designed purely for slaughter. The Duke froze, visibly shocked. Subia continued, her tone calm but serious, say it was almost impossible to believe that an 8-year-old could construct a perfect military-grade formula, a technique known as the golden ratio. Concluding her report, she stated plainly that the young master possessed a natural talent for killing. The Duke leaned back in thought, his expression darkening. After a moment, he asked carefully whether Subia was implying that she would refuse to teach Dale, given up position as an elder of the Blue Tower, an institution known for opposes destructive magic. Subia denied it at once. On the contrary, she explained, it was precisely because of this that she wished to guide him personally. A child born with such power needed direction, not suppression. The Duke studied her closely, then admitted there was no reason to refuse her proposal. Subia nodded and continued, adding that during her lessons she had sensed Dale's fascination with his father's forbidden art. The Duke looked startled, but Subia pressed on. She had heard the tale of the Black Mage's love, how the Duke had sworn to Lady Elelena never to pass down the dark arts to their children. She respected that vow deeply, yet she spoke with conviction when she added that such a promise did not give him the right to decide his son's future. With talent of this magnitude, she argued, denying Dale his true path would not protect him. It would only stunt the potential of a child born once in an era. From the top of the stairs, Dale crouched quietly, eavesdropping on the conversation below. He frowned in frustration, unable to make sense of their words but certain they were talking about him. Remembering the immense power of his first spell, he thought to himself how even Lady Subia of the Blue Tower had been visibly astonished. Letting out a sigh, he decided he would have to be more cautious when using his power from now on. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling, "Young Lord Dale?" He quickly got up from the floor, grinning with excitement. The voice belonged to a man clad in armor. "Uncle Helmet!" Dale shouted happily, asking why he was here and where he had been all this time. With a hearty laugh, the knight explained that he had been fulfilling his duty of protecting Meducha. He had been busy sweeping through dangerous dungeons and exterminating monsters. Lifting Dale into his arms, Helmet smiled proudly. Dale returned the smile, immediately understanding that his uncle had been on a dungeon-conquering campaign. In his thoughts, Dale reflected that dungeon appearances, or monster floods, were major crises in this world, disasters that could devastate entire provinces. Ever since the fall of the Demon King, such threats had persisted. Monster attacks often caused enormous damage to settlements, which made dungeon subjugation the knight's most critical duty. Their primary task was to clear the remaining strongholds of the Demon King's former domain, and to suppress outbreaks before they reached nearby towns. He also noted grimly that the situation in the Duchy of Saxon was far worse than most, and that he himself was indirectly responsible. In his past life as Han Xiang, after defeating the Demon King, the Empire had granted the Duke of Saxon dominion over the Demon King's ruined territories, ordering him to reclaim and purify those lands. In truth, it had been a political maneuver, a way for the Empire to dump its dirtiest work onto others under the guise of reward. Back in the present, Dale looked at his uncle with genuine concern and told him not to get hurt. Helmet was touched by the young lord's words, smiling warmly at his kindness. At that moment, Duke Jackson entered the hall. Dale immediately called out to his father, and Helmet bowed respectfully, receiving the Duke's thanks for his efforts on the campaign. Moments later, Duchess Elelena arrived, curious about the commotion. Dale wondered silently what she was doing there. The Duchess hurried to her son, eyes shining with pride. "I heard you reach the first circle," she exclaimed joyfully, fussing over him and praising his accomplishment as extraordinary. The Duke smiled too, congratulating his son, and telling him that if there was anything he wanted, he should not hesitate to ask. Dale hesitated, considering whether requesting permission to study necromancy would be too suspicious. Trying to think of a normal wish for an 8-year-old, he suddenly blurted out, "I want a little sister!" Both parents froze, faces turning red. The Duke cleared his throat awkwardly before replying, "I will try." Dale cheered enthusiastically, completely unaware of their embarrassment, or perhaps pretending not to. Outside the tower, Captain Helmet laughed uncontrollably after hearing about the young lord's unexpected request, while another knight begged him to stop laughing so loudly. That night, Dale lay in bed, exhausted from the day's events. Pretending to be an innocent child at his true mental age felt increasingly tiring. He wondered if his fatigue came from using magic earlier. Suddenly, a sharp burning pain shot through his body, and his surroundings darkened. In a vivid nightmare, he saw the figure of Count Brandenburg, his old betrayer, stepping out of the shadows. The man's voice echoed coldly through the darkness, greeting him with a sinister smile. "It's been a long time, Han Xiang." In the darkness of his nightmare, Count Brandenburg appeared before Han Xiang, his expression twisted with mockery. He called him weak and fickle, ridiculing how easily he had softened. With a sneer, Brandenburg taunted him, asking if he was happy now with his new life, loving parents, and a warm home. He implied that since Han Xiang's back was no longer cold and his stomach was full, he must have abandoned his thirst for vengeance. Then his grin grew darker as he warned that the Empire would find him. No matter how far he ran, they would hunt him down and erase every trace of his existence from the world. Dale woke with a start, gasping for breath as waves of mana erupted violently around him. Clutching his chest, he felt as if his heart were about to burst.